Hey guys, Like here. Now, of course, as some of you guys know, I'm homeschooled, and this is, of course, a redo after a while ago I wasn't able to make this video, by the way. But moving on. Now, here are, of course, 11 things that I learned from being homeschooled. And one of them was just how to have a sense of reality. Now, some people will not think that they will not have a sense of reality after going to homeschool and being isolated. But to be frank, I didn't really know I was actually isolated until I got outside of the old town, the old small town that I used to live at. Because I used to think that before I was homeschooled that, everybody was like, people that were in the town that I was in. I thought everybody was like that, like in our small town. But when I moved out of that town and moved into a new town that I lived in, and I saw many different, groups of people like I did, you could say that I had a much broader sense of reality. And that's, not everybody is like that. And not everybody has to be like that. And, of course, I started growing a much bigger sense of reality. And you could also say it kind of sharpened my intuition quite a bit better as well. I had to become, you know, more focused on what people were socially doing, you know, in order to survive, like I had to at the time. And number two, just how to use my imagination. Of course, being by myself a lot, not having as much to do after I got done with all my schoolwork, is that, I had to, of course, again, learn how to use my imagination in order to, find enough to do. Because, after, again, my schoolwork was done, there was a big portion of my days, lots of times, where I basically just had nothing else to do. When you are even living in a mansion and you have all this stuff, eventually you just run out of stuff to do. And that is until, of course, you use your imagination. If you don't have an imagination, you aren't going to survive with nothing to do. Just plain and simple. I also had learned that also as well when I was actually reading about, some history about, the Holocaust actually, where these people, typically the ones that didn't have an imagination, weren't able to survive through the camps that they were put into. Especially the people that didn't have an imagination. They tended to go crazy, and they tended to have more issues than the people that were able to have an imagination and find something to do, find something to take their minds off of, etc. And that was definitely something that I had learned at the time that to this day, has become such a great thing to have. Number 4 is how to obtain new skills. Now, the easiest way to obtain a new skill is just to have a hobby. I mean, I figured it out. It's a lot more easier to obtain a new skill than you might think, actually. I mean, sure, sometimes it might take some money, especially if you have a very expensive hobby, but, lots of times I figured out that it actually doesn't take a whole lot of money to obtain new skills. Like, it actually really doesn't. And number 5, people's opinions don't affect my way of life. Now, I used to think that, the way people thought about me mattered. In when I was in my regular school, before I was homeschooled, I was just taught that I wouldn't amount to anything. Excuse me. And, I used to believe in that. But, after I was homeschooled, I started learning about all these new things. And I was even getting good at all the subjects that I was told I was never going to be good at. I mean, things like English, for instance. At one point, I was basically just making an F in English, to be frank. And then, when I was homeschooled, I was actually learning how to put sentences together, how to spell correctly, and all that. In fact, I had actually learned that I was actually good at spelling and remembering how to do these words and everything. And, when I got homeschool, I was at least doing C to B average at the time when I left homeschool. Like, I was able to read just fine and everything. Unlike my, of course, teachers from the regular school told me I wasn't capable of doing, I was just fine. And that, you don't have to follow people's opinions all the time in order to live. You know, people will think shitty things and throw shit at you all the time, but, you just kind of have to live with it sometimes and just move on. Because life always moves on, doesn't it? Number 6, and this is one of the big ones, is how to adjust. Now, I've seen so many people in so many workplaces that are so afraid of losing their jobs. And of course, you might think, why is that? Well, the reason why is because they don't want to adjust to anything. They don't want to have to learn how to read, because at one point I actually learned that a number of these guys that were afraid of losing their jobs actually didn't even know how to read. They didn't want to have to go to college, etc. They've been working at the same place that they've been working at, or at least the same field, since they got out of high school. And, lots of times they also think that once you get out of high school, everything you've learned, I mean, they just think that you don't have to learn anything else after you get out of high school, which is not true. And when I was first homeschooled, I had to learn to adjust to a very different lifestyle than I was used to. Like, for instance, I was used to having friends. Like, I was used to having a lot of friends to have something to do, while my brother was always hogging in 64 or whatever. And then I had to learn how to adjust to that kind of change and that kind of way of life. And of course, I went from being an extrovert to becoming an introvert. But of course, afterwards, after I got out of homeschool and being bossed around quite a bit, you could say that kind of made me an introvert for life at this point. That's not going to change, but But you could say I learned that sometimes in life you just have to adjust. It might take time, but you just have to do it. Number 7, there is no absolutes in the way of learning. Now, nowadays, schools are at least maybe starting to try and teach kids in the way that they learn versus just acting like there's something wrong with them, like they did me. Like I was mentally handicapped, which of course I'm not, but anyway. But there's just no absolute way for kids to learn. I mean, just because you learn differently from somebody else doesn't mean that they're better than you. A lot of schools still only teach one way, and if you don't learn the way that they teach, they still sometimes to this day will treat you like there's something wrong with you or like you need help. And let's see, number 8, do not think. When I was homeschooled, I learned to not think too traditionally, because when I was in regular school, I was taught that I needed to get this kind of a job and I needed to do traditional jobs and blah blah blah, and I needed to live traditionally and blah blah blah. I needed to be Christian. But when I became homeschooled, I would say a year or two into it, I started to learn that all the things that I was taught about my way of life from a regular school was complete BS. That I didn't actually have to live the way that they were teaching me to live. Now, of course, there are certain things that you do have to do in life, but it's not so. Life isn't so strict, really. But, if you really are around somebody that strict, you probably just need to stop talking to them in general. Number 9, that learning can actually be fun. Of course, when you're in regular school, I mean, it sucks. It really does suck ass. And of course, you always get pissed off at the kid that, you know, tells the teacher or tries to remind the teacher when to do our homework and all that. We all hate that kid. In fact, I still do. But, you know, when I was in homeschool, we didn't do any homework, for one. And, after a while, I actually started liking to read, for one. When before I was homeschooled, I thought reading was just for geeks, and that you didn't have to learn how to read. But of course, when I was homeschooled, I learned differently. I mean, there's so many things you can't do when you can't read properly. Let me tell you. Uh, I mean, yeah, you can do certain things without reading, but if you want to get, let's say, a higher end job anywhere, pretty much, you are going to have to learn how to read properly. That, and I also learned that reading could be fun. Like, I remember reading the book Holes at the time, and it was actually a really fun book to read. When I was in regular school, I didn't ever have fun with reading, ever. Anyway, number 10, that people will always be judgmental. You know how long it's been since I've been homeschooled? It's at least been 15 years now. And still, to this day, I still get criticized for being homeschooled. And some people will always judge me for only being homeschooled. And I actually tell them, no, I actually was only homeschooled for like 4 years out of my high school. Like, I wasn't just homeschooled, I was also in regular school too. But, sometimes they still just get very judgmental and say shit about me. They're like, oh, you seem like somebody that's been homeschooled. And it's just like, man, I haven't been homeschooled for like 15 years. I'm over being homeschooled. And I mean, it's not like there weren't some important lessons that I learned at the time, but I moved on from being homeschooled. In fact, I don't remember a lot of things that I learned while I was homeschooled, to be frank. Like, I moved on. And number 11, to not give up. And I swear, it's just so strange how nowadays, especially, I see a lot of teachers and schools and workplaces, they are just discouraging people constantly. But, when it got to a point where I was actually able to go back to a regular school and actually learn with the regular kids and, people again, that was a real achievement in my life, like a real achievement. You know how many kids, after becoming homeschooled and being cast out like I was, go back to being, with the other kids and people and actually, learning with them like that instead of just being put in some stupid ass special ed class? That's freaking rare. Like, that hardly ever happens. When you're cast out and you're told, hey, you're handicapped, lots of times, even if they do well in all their subjects like I was able to do, they typically don't get brought back with the other kids again and are just put back in special ed. It is just so ridiculous. The school system is just so fucking broken, even to this day. In fact, in some ways, it's actually even worse. Man, I could talk all damn day about how broken the school system is. It really is. But, of course, with that being said, I'll just end this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.